She spent everything she had to cross a continent. 3 weeks of rattling rail cars, mudlocked stage roads, and nights spent upright in seats that smelled of tobacco and other people's grief. All to marry a man she had never seen, a man whose letters had made her believe the world could still be gentle. Then the coach door opened. She stepped down into the dust of a town at the end of the map, looked into the face of the man who'd come for her, and felt her whole heart drop straight through the floor of her chest. It was the wrong feeling, the wrong man, the wrong everything. She had traveled for weeks to marry him, and in the space of a single breath, standing in the road with her trunk at her feet, she knew she had made a terrible mistake. What she didn't know yet, what none of us standing there knew how to tell her, was why the man in front of her looked nothing like the one she'd fallen in love with. This is the story of the worst day of Della Marsh's life, and of everything that grew out of it. The stage came in 2 hours late and leaning, the way it always did when Prout drove it, and I remember thinking the dust hung in the air longer than usual that afternoon, like even the road didn't want to settle. I was sitting on the bench outside Coyle's, no relation to me, just a man who'd bought my cousin's name along with the store, with my tally book open on my knee and a pencil stub gone soft from the heat. I keep that book the way other men keep a dog. Number of head we run, weight of the feed we owe, the day the south fence went down and the day it went back up. Small facts. Facts hold still when nothing else does. I had been writing Tom, 19 days without meaning to, the way your hand will write the thing your mouth won't say, and I had just crossed it out when the coach groaned up to the rail. Wade stood a little apart from me by the post, with his hat low and his hands doing nothing. That alone told me how bad off he was. Wade Hollis was never a man whose hands did nothing. Roping, mending, whittling, cracking his own knuckles one at a time like he was counting them, there was always something. But that afternoon he stood with his arms hanging, and his jaw set so tight I could see the muscle jumping in it, and he watched the coach door like it was a thing that might bite. Prout got down and dropped the step. A drummer came out first, all sample case and sweat, then an old woman the size of a fence rail, then her. I want to be honest about what I saw, because I've turned it over a great many times since, and a man's memory is a liar by trade. But here is what I believe I saw. A woman of maybe 26 or 7, in a traveling dress that had been good once and was now gray with road. Hair pinned up under a hat that had given up. A face that was too tired to be pretty in the way the word usually means, and was something better than pretty anyhow, a face that had decided things. She came down the step careful, one gloved hand on the rail, and she set her boots in the dirt of our town like a woman stepping onto the deck of a ship she meant to sail. And then she lifted her eyes and looked around for the man she'd come to find. I watched her gaze go past me, old man, store bench, no account, and land on Wade. Of course it landed on Wade. He was the only man standing there at the right age, hat and boots and the rest of it, and he was looking back at her with an expression I will not soon forget, because it was the expression of a man being marched somewhere he did not want to go. I saw the exact moment her face changed. It was not a slow thing. It was a door slamming. One instant she was searching, hopeful in that braced, careful way. The next, something behind her eyes simply shut. She had been looking for a particular man, and she had found a stranger wearing his place, and whatever she had built across 3 weeks of travel, whatever shape she'd given him in her mind, the voice she'd put to his words, the warmth she'd been riding toward like a fire seen from a long way off in the cold, it collapsed right there in the road. She didn't cry. I'll give her that then and always. She straightened her spine a half-inch, which on her looked like a fortress going up, and she said in a clear voice with the east still in it, "Mr. Hollis." Wade's throat worked. "Yes'm." "I'm Della Marsh." She waited. When he gave her nothing back but that miserable silence, a little color came up in her cheeks, not a blush, the other thing, the heat that comes before a person says something they can't take back. "You wrote to me." And there it was. The thing none of us had figured how to carry the last 19 days lay down in the road between them, and Wade, God help him. Wade was not a man built for moments. Wade looked at his own boots and said, "No, ma'am, I didn't." I have replayed that too. The way her gloved fingers tightened on the handle of her smaller bag. The way the old woman from the coach hurried off, sensing weather. The way a dog under the boardwalk thumped its tail twice and then thought better of it. "I beg your pardon," Della said. "I didn't write the letters," Wade said again, and now he made himself look at her, which I think was the hardest thing he did that whole terrible year. "My brother did, Tom." You could see her trying to make the arithmetic come out. A brother. There were two of them then. She'd come to marry one and been met by another, some confusion of the road, a mix-up, easily set right. I watched hope try to crawl back up into her face. "Then is Tom." She looked again at the empty doorway of the store, the empty street, the long shimmer of road behind the coach. "Is he coming? Is he unwell?" Wade said nothing for so long that I had to do it. I'm not proud of much in this story, but I'm not ashamed of that. I closed my tally book and stood up off the bench, because a thing that hard shouldn't be left lying in the dirt for everyone to step around. "Ma'am," I said, "my name's Asak Coyle. I'm the foreman out at the Hollies place. I've known these boys since they were knee-high to a heifer." I took my hat off, which a man does for two reasons, and she was smart enough to know which one. I saw it reach her before I said it. "Tom passed, 19 days back. Fever took him quick. We sent word, but well, word doesn't travel faster than a person, not out here. Our letter and you must have passed each other somewhere out on the plains. I have buried a wife and two brothers of my own, and I have stood at the edge of more graves than I can put a number to. And I will tell you that the worst sound I know is not weeping. It's the sound a person makes when the breath goes out of them and doesn't quite come back, that small cut-off thing, half a word, that says the body understood before the mind agreed to. Della made that sound, just once. Then she pressed her lips together so hard they went white, and she looked down at her trunk where Prude had set it in the dirt, all her worldly belongings strapped up in a box, and she said, very quietly to no one, "I sold the piano." I didn't know what that meant. I came to later. For the moment it just hung there, 4 words with a whole life folded up inside them. Here is what I learned over the following weeks, pieced out of her and out of Tom's papers, and out of the things Wade finally said when the silence got too heavy to carry alone. Della Marsh had been a school teacher in a town in Ohio, the kind of town where a woman past 25 and unmarried becomes a sort of public furniture, useful, looked after, gently pitied, and never once asked what she might want for herself. Her parents were dead. A married brother had a house full of children and a wife who counted the potatoes. Della had a small room in that house, and a place at that table that was made plainer to her every year. And then a friend, a widow who'd gone west and lived, had passed her name to a man out in Montana Territory who was looking for a wife, and the letters had started. I read some of those letters, not to pry. She showed them to me, near the end of all this, because she said I was the only one who'd known the man on both sides of the paper. And I will tell you, they were the letters of a man I recognized clean through, because they were Tom all over. Tom Hollies was the soft one of the two brothers, and I don't mean weak, because the boy had a kind of iron in him that the strong-seeming never get tested enough to grow. I mean he felt things at full strength and wasn't ashamed of it. He read books out under the cottonwood by lamplight until the bugs ran him in. He could name you the wildflowers. He wrote like he talked, which was rare and warm and a little funny, and in those letters he had told Della Marsh the truth about a hard country and made it sound like a place a person could love, because he loved it, and love is the only honest advertisement there is. He had not lied to her about one thing. I checked. He told her the winters would frighten her and the summers would bore her and the nearest doctor was a day's ride and a gamble. He told her he was not a handsome man, which was a lie of modesty. Tom had a good open face, and that he could offer her a small house, a hard life, and as much of his own heart as she'd have. He had asked her, in the last letter she received before she came, whether she could bear to be loved by a man who would never be rich and never be still and never love her quietly. And Della Marsh had sold her piano, the one thing in her brother's house that was truly hers, her mother's piano, and bought a ticket west to say yes. She had said yes to a dead man, and the live one was standing in the road with his hat in his hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere on God's earth. We loaded her trunk into the wagon because there was nothing else to do with it, and nothing else to do with her. You can't leave a person standing in a town that has one street and a store and a stage that comes twice a week. She climbed up onto the seat without being helped, which I noted, and Wade took the reins, and I rode my horse alongside because I did not trust either of those two not to drive the whole rig into the river out of sheer misery. It's a long way out to the Hollies' place. Long enough that the sun came down red over the breaks and the cottonwoods went black against it, and the air took on that smell the high country gets in the evening, sage and dust, and somewhere far off the green smell of the creek. Della sat with her back straight the entire way. She watched the country go by, the country she'd crossed a continent to live in, the country that had just taken everything from her before she'd unpacked a single thing, and I could not read her face, and I suspect she meant for it to be that way. Once, only once, she spoke. We'd come up over the rise where you first see the place, the house Tom built, low and long with the porch he was so proud of, the barn, the corral, the cottonwood with the lamp hook still nailed to it, and she looked at it a long moment in the failing light. Then she said, not to Wade exactly, but out into the air the way she'd said the thing about the piano. He told me about the porch. He said he built it facing east so we could watch the morning come up over the bear's paw. Her voice didn't break. It did something worse. It stayed perfectly level. He said it would be the first thing I'd love about the place. Wade kept his eyes on the team, but I saw his hands tighten on the lines until the knuckles stood up white, and I understood, riding there in the dark beside that wagon, that I was not watching one person's grief. I was watching two. Because here is the thing I hadn't told her yet, the thing that would take the better part of a winter to come out. Tom Hollies had not built that house alone. Wade had laid every floorboard of it. Wade had set the porch posts and hung the door. Tom had the words and the dreaming. Wade had the back and the hands. They had built the place together, the talker and the doer, the way they'd done everything since their father died and left them, 11 and 14, with a half section of bad land and each other. Tom had written the letters, but it was Wade who'd had to read them aloud first, everyone because, and I'd sworn to Tom I'd never say it, and the boy is gone now, so I'll keep it close as I can, because Wade Hollies could not read a word of them himself. He dictated nothing and written nothing. But he'd sat by the lamp every night a letter came back from Ohio, and his little brother had read him every line that woman wrote, and somewhere in there, across a winter and a spring, Wade had fallen for her too. Quietly, hopelessly, the way the strong-seeming do who never get told it's allowed. So when she said he told me about the porch, she was grieving the man who'd written the words. And the man beside her was grieving the brother who'd read them to him, and the woman he'd loved by lamplight and would now, by every law of decency he knew, have to send back home on the next stage like a parcel that came to the wrong house. We got to the place full dark. I lit the lamp on the porch myself, the east-facing porch, and the light came up yellow over all of us standing there not knowing our parts. Della looked at the house. The house looked back. Somewhere out past the barn a coyote tuned up and another answered it. "There's a room ready," Wade said, the most words he'd managed at once all day. It was, "We got it ready. For you, you'll want to rest. We'll sort the rest out tomorrow." She turned and looked at him then, full on, for what I think was the first time since the road. And whatever she'd shut behind her eyes back at the stage, it opened just a crack, not warmth, not yet, nothing so simple. It was the look of a person taking the measure of another person, weighing him, seeing maybe that his misery was real and not the cheap kind. "You came to meet me," she said. You knew he was gone, and you came and stood in that road and waited for me anyway. Why?" Wade was quiet a long moment. "Because he asked me to," he said finally. "Last thing he said that made sense. He said, 'Don't let her come all this way to nobody.'" Wade's voice did the thing then, the catch, and he looked away out at the dark so she wouldn't see his face. "So I didn't, that's all. That's the only thing I had to give him, and I gave it." Della Marsh stood on the porch her dead almost husband had built facing the morning, 3 weeks and a whole life from home, with everything she owned in a box behind her, and not one person in 1,000 miles who was truly hers. And she did not get on the wagon. She did not weep, or rail, or ask to be taken back to town. She said, "Thank you for telling me the truth. Most men would have lied to make it easier." Then she picked up her small bag, and she went into the room they'd made ready, and she shut the door. I stood out on the porch with Wade a while after, neither of us talking, the lamp ticking as the bugs hit it. Down in the corral, a horse stamped and blew. The bear's paw was a black line against a sky gone thick with stars, the kind of sky that makes a man feel the size he truly is. After a long while Wade said low, "She's got to go home, Asa." "I expect," I said. "It's the only decent thing." "I expect," I said again. And I opened my tally book, though it was too dark to write in, and I held it on my knee the way a man holds something to keep his hands from shaking. And I thought about a woman who'd sold her mother's piano to come and be loved, and the 2 brothers who'd built a house out of words and lumber, and how the only one of the 3 who could read those letters now was lying under a cottonwood up on the rise. She did not go home. I'd like to say it was one grand moment that decided it, the kind of thing they'd put in a book, but it wasn't. It was a thaw, slow as the real one that comes off the breaks in March, where you don't see the ice go, you just notice one day the creek is talking again. It was made of small mornings. The first of those mornings I came up to the house at gray light, the way I do, to start the coffee before the men come in. The kitchen was already warm. Della Marsh was standing at the stove in a clean apron I didn't recognize, her hair pinned up proper, and she had biscuits going and the coffee on, and she did not turn around when I came in. She just said, "There were eggs, I didn't know what state to leave them in, so I gathered them." I hoped that was right. It was not the voice of a woman packing to leave. I sat down slow and let her pour me a cup. "You sleep any?" I asked. "No," she set the pot back. "I read the letters. I waited. All of them through the night." She finally turned, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, the crying long done, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen yet, not peace, but the start of a question she meant to get to the bottom of. "Mr. Coyle, Asa, I need to ask you something, and I need the same thing you all gave me yesterday, which is the truth, even where it's ugly." "All right." "The man who wrote these," she said, and she touched the bundle of letters on the table, tied with a bit of blue ribbon I would later learn was the ribbon off her mother's hymnal, the one thing besides the piano she'd loved. "Tom, he writes here about his brother, not by name much, but he's all through it. My brother says the north pasture will green up first. My brother thinks I'm a fool to court a woman by mail, and maybe he's right." A small, terrible ghost of a smile. "He writes about you too. Asa swears the gray mare can predict a storm, and I've stopped doubting him." She set her hand flat on the bundle. "He wrote me into this whole family before I ever came. I know all of you. I've known you for 8 months. And not one of you knew I was real until I climbed down off that coach. I didn't have anything for that, so I drank my coffee. Here's my question," she said. "Did Tom love me? Or did he love the idea of getting a wife by post, the romance of it, and I'm just the woman who answered? Because I have to know which dead man I'm grieving, the real one or the one I made up." It was a fair question and a hard one, and I gave her the only answer I had. "I can't tell you what was in the boy's heart, Della. No man can swear to another man's heart." She nodded like she'd expected that and started to turn back to the stove. And then I found I couldn't leave it there because it wasn't the whole truth, and she'd asked for the whole truth. "But I'll tell you what I saw. The day your first letter came back, accepting his, saying you'd write again, Tom came running down to the barn where I was doctoring a split hoof, and he was carrying that letter like it was lit, and he read it to me twice, and then he sat down on a hay bale and he cried. A grown man. Cried like the weight of being alone had just come off him after a long time of it. I don't know if that's love. I'm an old bachelor, I'm the wrong man to ask, but it wasn't romance of the post. It was a person who'd given up on a thing finding out he could have it after all. She stood very still at the stove. Then she nodded once sharp and wiped her face with the back of her wrist in a way that had nothing delicate about it and said, "Good. Then I'm grieving the real one. That's settled." That was Della all over, I'd learned. She liked things settled. She came from a place where her whole life had been left unsettled, kept hanging. We'll see, Della, perhaps when the children are older, perhaps when there's room, and she had crossed a continent partly to be done with being a thing other people would get to later. So she settled what she could. The eggs, the biscuits, which dead man she was grieving, and before that day was out, the largest thing of all. Wade had been avoiding the house. He'd taken to riding fence at hours no fence needed riding, and eating in the bunkhouse with the men, and generally arranging his whole life so as not to be in a room with her, because he could not look at her without his heart going sideways, and he was ashamed clear through of feeling anything at all over his brother's woman with his brother 3 weeks in the ground. I knew it. She didn't, yet. She thought he was avoiding her out of grief, or distaste, or the awkwardness of a man saddled with an unwanted guest. She thought he wanted her gone. So she went to find him to settle that, too. I wasn't there for the start of it. I came around the side of the barn for the wire stretcher, and there they were in the corral, the two of them, Wade with a coil of rope gone slack in his hands and Della standing square in front of him in her gathered-up apron. And I stopped where I was because some conversations a man doesn't walk into. "Not going to be a burden on you," she was saying. "I won't be a thing you have to be decent about. I've been that. I've been the thing everyone was decent about. I'd rather starve honest than be pitied comfortable, so I'm telling you plain, I'll work for my keep till I can pay my own passage, and then I'll go, and you can stop riding fence at 4 in the morning to keep clear of me." Wade looked like she'd hit him with the stretcher. "That's not," he started and stopped, the way he always stopped, the words backing up on him. "That's not what?" And Wade Hollies, who could not put two soft sentences together to save his soul, who'd spent a winter loving a woman through his brother's mouth and never said a word of it, stood there and could not say a word of it now. I watched him try. I watched him fail. I watched him reach for the only thing he had, which was the truth told plain and ugly the way it had to be, and I held my breath because I didn't know which way it would fall. "I ride fence at 4, he said, "because if I sit at that table across from you I'm going to do something I got no right to do, and I'd sooner freeze on a fence line than disrespect my brother's memory and your grief both. There. That's why. You wanted it plain." The whole corral went quiet. Even the gray mare quit chewing. Della stared at him, and I watched her do the arithmetic again, the way she had on the platform, only this time it came out different. This time it came out the letters. I could see it land, every line Tom had written, and the truth she didn't know was inside them. That there'd been a second man at that lamp every night, a man who couldn't read them himself, a man who'd heard her every word in his brother's voice and kept his mouth shut for 2 seasons. "You heard them," she said slowly. "The letters, you heard all of them." Wade's silence was its own answer. "He read them to you." "Every one." Wade's jaw worked. "I can't," and there he stopped, and I saw him decide to give her the last of it, the thing he'd hidden behind harder than anything. "I never learned my letters, Della. Tom did, on account of our mother lived long enough to teach the one of us. So he read me the world, including you." He looked down at the rope in his hands like he'd never seen it before. "I'm not telling you this to make a claim. I don't have a claim. He courted you fair and you came for him, and that's holy ground, and I'll not walk on it. I'm telling you so you'll quit thinking I want you gone. I want," the word cost him. "It's the opposite, and that's exactly why you can't stay. Because it'd be a sin against him every single day, and you'd see it on my face, and you'd come to hate the both of us. So I'll pay your passage, not out of pity, out of the other thing, the one I don't get to say." I have heard a great many men talk in my time, smoother men than Wade. I have never heard one say a truer thing or pay more dear for the saying of it. Della Marsh stood there in the high country morning with the dust coming up gold around her boots, and the thing she did next is the reason there's a story to tell at all. The reason I'm an old man writing this down so it isn't lost. She didn't fall into his arms. That's the cheap version, and it didn't happen, and it would have been wrong if it had. She was grieving a man she'd loved through 8 months of letters, and you don't set that down in a corral on a Tuesday. What she did was harder and better, she said. I'm not going to answer that today. It wouldn't be honest and it wouldn't be fair to him. She nodded up toward the rise, toward the cottonwood, and Wade flinched and then steadied because she'd named it. She'd put Tom right there in the corral with them where he belonged instead of pretending he wasn't. But I'm not getting on the stage either. Not yet. You don't get to decide what's a sin against your brother on my behalf. That's mine to weigh too. I earned the weighing of it the day I sold my piano. So here's what's settled. There it was again, settled. I'll stay through the winter and work, like I said, not as your charity and not as your the other thing, as a hand. As a person learning whether this is a country she can live in, which is a thing your brother told me to find out before I gave my whole life to it, and I never got the chance because the man I was going to find out beside is gone. Her voice finally cracked just there, just once, and she let it, and then she put it back. Come spring, when the stage roads open, we'll both of us know our own minds better, and if I go, I go, and if I stay. She didn't finish it. She picked up the wire stretcher I'd come for, since I clearly wasn't going to, and handed it to me as she passed and said, I believe you wanted this, and went on up to the house with her chin level and her eyes wet and her whole bearing that of a woman who had just, for the first time in her life, decided her own next thing. Wade stood in the corral a long time after she'd gone. Then he looked at me. He'd known I was there the whole while, of course he had, and he said, hoarse, What do I do, Asa? And I told him the truest thing I know, which I'd learned from 40 years of cattle and weather and grief and the small daily mercy of work. You don't do anything, I said. You let the winter do it. You feed the stock and you mend the fence and you sit at that table across from her like a man who can be trusted, because that's the only way she'll ever find out whether you can. You don't court her. God, don't court her. You just be there every morning, same as you were there on that platform. That's the only language you've got, son. And lucky for you, it's the only one that's ever been worth a damn. Wade nodded slow. Up on the rise, the cottonwood moved in a wind I couldn't feel down in the corral, all its leaves turning over silver at once, the way they do before weather. Winter's coming early, I said. Because the gray mare had told me, and because some things you can feel in your knees before you can see them in the sky. I had no idea how early, or how hard, or that before the stage roads opened again, that winter would put every word any of us had said out in that corral to a test none of us was ready for. The storm came down out of the north on the 9th of November, and it came the way the bad ones always do, not as a storm at first, but as a stillness. I want to set the small things down before the big one, because the big one is the kind that, told plain, sounds like every other blizzard story, and this one wasn't. This one had 3 people in it who'd spent 11 weeks learning to live in the same house without saying the thing that was true. And they had learned to. That's the part nobody writes down, the 11 quiet weeks. Della had turned out to be one of those people the country takes to and takes care of, the way it won't for some. She'd learned to milk and to doctor a scour and to set a snare, learned the difference between weather coming and weather passing, learned which of the men to trust and which to keep a skillet handy around. She kept the books, my books, which I handed over to her with more relief than I'll admit, because her hand was finer than mine, and her sums never wandered. She and Wade had arrived at a way of being in a room together, not easy exactly, but honest. He'd say a thing, she'd answer it. The silences had stopped being walls and started being just silence, the ordinary kind that married people and old friends sit inside without minding. Twice I'd seen her laugh at something he said, Wade was funnier than anyone gave him credit for, dry as a creek bed in August. And twice, I'd seen him catch himself watching her and look away fast. And once I'd seen her catch him watching and not look away. And the two of them had stood there a half-second too long across the supper table before she'd asked someone to pass the bread. Spring was the deal. They'd both held to it. Neither one had said the thing. Tom was still up on the rise, and they'd both visited him, separately I noticed, never together, and the deal held the winter steady the way a keystone holds an arch, by sitting there and not moving. Then the stillness came, and the sky went the color of a dead fire, and the gray mare wouldn't leave the lee of the barn. And I told Wade we had cattle still up in the north pasture that needed bringing down to the brakes before it hit, and Wade said he'd go. And Della said she'd ride with him because two could push the herd faster than one, and the light was already going. I should have stopped them. I've thought about it 10,000 times. But the truth is two riders could push that herd faster, and the truth is the cattle would have died strung out in that pasture if somebody hadn't gone. And the truth is I'm an old man with bad knees and a worse horse, and I'd have only slowed them. So I stayed to mind the home place and get the barn ready, and I watched them ride out into that yellow dead light, and I told myself they'd be back before it broke. It broke in 2 hours. Not snow first, wind. The kind of wind that comes flat across 400 miles of open country with nothing to slow it, that finds every crack in a wall and screams through it, that lays the grass down and then there's no grass, just white, just a roaring white nothing where the world used to be. I got the stock in. I lit every lamp in the house and hung one in the barn loft window where it might be seen from the rise, and I stood in the door of that house and I prayed, which I don't do often and didn't do well, and I waited. They didn't come back before dark. They didn't come back at dark. The lamp in the loft burned, and the wind tried to put it out, and I climbed up twice to tend it with my heart going like a hammer. Here is what happened out there. I had it after in pieces, the way I have everything, some from her, more from him, the most from the long silence afterward that told me more than either of them said. They'd got the herd moving and most of the way down when the wind hit, and in the whiteout Wade's horse put a foot in a badger hole and went down hard and threw him and came up lame. Wade came up worse, his leg, below the knee, the bone of it. Out in open country in a killing storm with night coming and a lame horse and a herd scattering and a busted leg. That's a death sentence written plain. Every man in that country knew the arithmetic of it. You don't survive a blizzard night down and hurt in the open. You just don't. And here's where the woman who traveled 3 weeks to marry a dead man earned every mile of it. Della did not panic. She told me later in the flat, settled voice that was hers when a thing had been hard. I'd read about it, in one of Tom's letters. He wrote me a whole letter once about what to do if you're caught out in winter because he said it scared him that I came from a place where winter was just cold and not death. He told me, don't run for home, you'll never make it, you'll die looking. Find a low place out of the wind. Get the horses down and get behind them. Get the snow to work for you instead of against you. He drew me a little picture of it. I kept it. She'd kept it. She'd kept all of them. And out there in the screaming white with a man who couldn't walk, she'd remembered a dead man's drawing and done exactly what it said. She got Wade into a wash, a cut bank low place out of the worst of the wind. She got his lame horse and her own down, I don't know how. 100-pound woman putting 2 horses down on their sides in a panic, but she did it. And Tom's letter said the horses would give heat and break the wind, and they did. She packed snow into a wall on the open side with her bare hands until her hands quit working, and then with her arms. She got Wade's leg splinted with a tent peg and a stirrup leather. And then she did the thing that the men in town still talk about, the thing that I think finally settled it for both of them more than any word could have. She lay down against Wade Holly's in the dark, and the cold with the horses at their backs and the snow walling them in. And she kept him awake, and kept him warm, and kept him alive through 11 hours of a night that killed 40 head of cattle and 2 men over in the next county. She did it for a man she was supposed to leave in the spring. She did it without weighing it. There wasn't time to weigh it, and I think that's the point. I think a person's truest answer is the one they give before they've had time to decide what answer they ought to give. The deal said spring. The storm didn't care about the deal. And when it came down to it, when it was a busted-up grieving man and a killing night, and no one to see and no credit to be had, Della Marsh did not hesitate over whether she had the right. What they said to each other in that wash through that long night, I never asked and they never told, and I'd not print it if I knew it. Some ground is holy. But I'll tell you what Wade said to me once the following summer when his leg had knit crooked and he walked with a hitch he'd carry to his grave. He said it looking out at the east porch where she was shelling peas in the morning sun. He said, "Out there I figured I was dead, Asa. Cold gets in and it's almost easy, you start to not mind." And every time I started to not mind, she'd say my name. Just Wade, sharp, like I'd left a gate open. He was quiet a while. Nobody ever said my name like it mattered if I answered. Tom did the talking, the loving, all that, and I never minded. I'm not, that was his gift and I had mine. But out there it was just my name in the dark, over and over, a woman refusing to let me go, and I thought if I live I'm not letting the spring take her. I don't care whose ground it is. He'd not want her sent off either. He'd want, Wade's voice did the catch, the one that ran in that family. He'd want her warm. Tom would want her warm and loved and not alone in some Ohio kitchen counting potatoes till she died. That's all he ever wanted for her. I happened to be the one still here to do it. I found them at first light. The storm blew out near dawn the way they do. Sudden, the sky scrubbed clean and blue and innocent like it hadn't just tried to kill everyone I cared about. I rode out the second I could see, and I followed the wash because it was the only sense to be had. And I came up over the cut bank, and there they were, two snow-humped horses, and between them two people, gray-faced and frost-grimed and alive. Della sitting up with Wade's head in her lap and her own coat over the both of them and her hands like two blocks of wood. And when she heard my horse she looked up and she didn't cry and she didn't cheer. She said, and I will hear it till I die, the flat, exhausted, settled triumph of it, "His name's Wade." He answered, every time. "You write that down, Asa. You write that in your book." So I did. I got out the tally book right there with my own hands shaking and I wrote it. The only thing I ever wrote in that ledger that wasn't a number, both alive. She kept him answering. It's still there. I look at it sometimes. They were married in the spring when the stage roads opened, not because the roads opened, but because that had been the deal. Come spring we'll know our own minds. And they kept the deal honest right to the end of it. She could have gone. The passage money sat in a jar on the mantel the whole winter and neither one touched it and both of them knew it was there. And that's the thing I want you to understand. She stayed free. She didn't stay because she was stranded or grateful or trapped by a storm. She stayed because come spring, with the roads open and the money in the jar and her own 2 feet under her, she waited the way she'd promised Tom she would, and she chose it. She chose the hard country and the crooked-legged quiet man and the porch that faced the morning. They were married under the cottonwood on the rise, right there. She wanted it there, and Wade understood why, and so did I, because the third person in that marriage was up there in the ground, and he'd brought them together with 8 months of words, and it would have been a lie to stand anywhere else. The preacher thought it was morbid. The preacher could go hang. We stood up there in the green spring grass with the bear's paw blue and far, and the wind turning the cottonwood leaves all silver at once. And Della Marsh married Wade Hollies with her dead almost husband's letters tied in her mother's hymnal ribbon, and held in her 2 hands the whole time. And when it was done, she walked over and laid her hand flat on Tom's stone for a long moment, and Wade stood back and let her. And I watched a thing close gently that had been broken open in a dusty road 8 months before. She's still out there. They both are. The leg never did straighten and she's got gray coming in at the temples now, and they never had children, which was a sorrow they carried quiet. But the porch faces east the way Tom built it, and most mornings you'll find the 2 of them out there before the work, watching the light come up over the bear's paw, not talking much. They never were big talkers, the both of them. He couldn't and she didn't need to. They'd learned the other language, the morning one, the one I'd told him about in the corral, Be there every day, same as the platform. I'm old now, older than I've got any right to be. I've handed the books over for good. But I keep my own little tally still, the way I always have, and the last thing I want to set down here, the thing this whole long story was for, is this. She traveled for weeks to marry him, and the instant she laid eyes on the man who came for her, she knew, down to the floor of her, that she'd made a terrible mistake.